Hello and welcome to today's episode of Conquer the Day. I am your host, Lindsay Pickowitz, and soon I will be joined by my lovely co-host, my husband, Brian Pickowitz. Today we have a special guest with us to help us navigate burnout, especially as entrepreneurs and high-level executives who have so much on their plate. It's very, very easy to get stuck in drive mode, where eventually you start to lose your creativity. You start to feel exhausted no matter how much sleep you get, and really you start to edge towards burnout, which is a really hard place to be, especially when you want to love what you do, you want to be present, and you really want to take care of yourself. But it just becomes really hard to do all of those things because your energy just doesn't uphold it. So that's what we're going to be diving into today. We're going to be talking about all things burnout, how to navigate it, how to tap back into your energy and your creativity. And we're going to bring a very special guest on to really teach us how to navigate this. Her name is Reina Lombardi, and she is not only an expert in this field, but she's also a client of ours at the Fitness Project. Now, introducing Reina. She has a lot of letters after her name, as you will see if you look at the title of this podcast. But at her core, in her practice, she is a licensed mental health counselor. She is a group private practice owner, and she's also a registered board-certified art therapist. Now, what's great about Reina is she also really practices what she preaches, which is very, very refreshing. She has been a client of ours for the last year or so, and over this year, she has really done the work on herself to get out of burnout and really rebuild her energy, rebuild her health and her well-being overall. After, as I said, edging towards burnout. She'll share stories in here about how before she started with us, it would take her almost half of a vacation to even start to feel relaxed. And now, the moment she closes the computer, she whoosh goes into relaxation. And that's just one sign of many that says whether you're edging towards burnout or not. So she's going to be diving into a lot of different practices that she uses and sharing her own story. But I won't delay us too much further. So if you are feeling stretched thin, if you're running on fumes, and really as much as you want to prioritize your health, it keeps going to the back burner, this is the episode for you. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope you take so much away from it and that you can actually go and apply to your life. That said, I will turn it over to myself, Brian, and Reina and get grooving on this podcast about how to navigate burnout and really get back to your creativity and your energy. Enjoy.
Thank you guys for having me.
You're welcome.
We're really grateful and blessed to have this conversation. And the goal is to really tap back into that creativity and inspire people to access that creativity. And one of the places we wanted to start with was inspired by one of the quotes you have on your website, which is art is the stored honey of the human soul.
Ooh.
So my question is why is art, creativity, or play important to our mental health and well-being?
Oh, it's such a good question. And I think it's a difficult one to answer in a really concise way. But I want to pull in history. And if you look at human history, how do we understand humanity over our entire existence on the planet? We do it through the documentation of the arts and artifacts that have been left behind. So art, creativity, the creative process is inherent within all of us. We all have that capacity to create. Now, how we express that creativity is going to vary based on individual to individual. But think about all the artistry that went into practice and took place for us to have this conversation via video in real time. That's a lot of creative ingenuity. So I think that is something that is inherently human When I was in college, before I decided to become a therapist, I was in art school. And, you have to take these like survey classes. There's 300 something people in there. And I had to take like an art history class, and it was about art across cultures. And my professor got up on stage. I'll never forget what he said. It was like, it just made my whole body vibrate. And it was, I know I am human because I create art. And there was something so deeply resonant in that statement for me that I just kind of clung to. And it's never left me. And it's something that I think about every day about the creative capacity of human beings and how we really are supposed to create. When you think about what you do for people, you're helping them to utilize their own creative energy, to harness their creative energy, to architect a life that fuels them and keeps them going. So it's just present all the time in everything we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you think about how often we overlook it because everything that we experience in some capacity is a manifestation of creativity. It's
Mhm.
in our music, it's in our shows, it's in our movies. And I think that at some capacity, current modern life diminishes that
Mhm.
because we are content creators or we're posting on social media. We're doing these things that are tapping into creativity, but we aren't fully experiencing a creative act, right? And I think at
Mm.
some capacity, we can look back at history and see. I love music, and I talk oftentimes about like the 1960s and 70s, where the blend of art as a humanistic experience and also technology, because you had music for the first time where people could get it more easily and experience it
Mhm.
and distribute it. And now it feels like it's not necessarily as prevalent in our lives because we're all so busy. We're also
Mm.
consuming. Um, I'm curious, like with that wave of thought process, or maybe even just like where people currently are,
What you see.
what you see, where does burnout manifest into our lives currently? Because if creativity is the opportunity for us to express and experience life, it feels like burnout might be the opposite of that. What's the blend between those two or how they are interwoven?
I think if we get into what really happens in our nervous system really has to be in a down-regulated state to be fully immersed in the creative process. So there's a psychologist, Mihaly Chechmahali. I don't
The
know
tough
if you've
one.
heard of him. It's a very difficult name. I always butcher it. I'm sorry. But his work was really about flow, understanding flow. And he pulled a lot from artists and musicians to really examine this. And in order to get in that creative state, we get into a flow state, but there you can become creative if you already are in a down-regulated state, like meditation. If you can really get into a good flow and meditation, then all of a sudden, pow, 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 all these ideas come into your mind, and you start to express and experiment and test and see what happens. When we're in an upregulated state or a highly stressed out state and our nervous system is in survival mode, we don't have the capacity to think creatively. We don't have the capacity to problem solve. And problem solving is a very essential part of the creative process. As a musician, if you're figuring out, okay, what chord is going to go, with this bass line over here, you're experimenting, you're testing, you're playing around to problem solve that. As an artist, you might be trying to figure out, how do I put these things together in a cohesive way that it makes this very interesting composition to keep my eye moving around the image so it doesn't get stuck in a single place. These are all problem solving skills we don't have access to if we're in a highly stressed state. And burnout, I think, is when our brain and body become so chronically stressed out and fatigued that we're just in survival mode, right? It's like you're at the beach and all of a sudden you're caught in a rip current and you're doggy paddling and a wave knocks you over and you come up, you get a breath, and then the wave comes back again, it knocks you over, and you keep doggy pedaling and you're not moving anywhere. And it just feels like all I can do is just try to breathe. That's the only thing I can do. We can't be creative in that state of being.
Yeah,
Does that
what's
make sense?
it does.
100%.
What's actually happening in your brain? Because I know you like to talk about the brain and the body, how it what actually happens in these terms we call like burnout or stress. But what's actually happening in that burnout state that makes it so we can't access problem solving and creativity? Because I think that's usually where
Yeah.
we try to go, right? When we're stressed, it's because we're trying to solve problems and we can't, or we're trying to move faster and we can't. So it seems
Mhm.
like there's almost a an aha that could be there for people of like, oh, me trying to solve problems when I'm stressed is actually part of the problem because I can't access creativity. But why is that in our brain or body?
Yeah. So when we're in survival mode, it has to do with oxygen flow and the way our nervous system operates. So, if we're in the survival state, our body is going to push the blood flow there. And with blood flow goes the oxygen. And so, if all the oxygen is primarily being focused into the part of the brain that is more responsible for getting you to take action without thought, right? Because to think takes a lot of time. Think about how much time it takes you to make a decision about what you want to eat when you go out to dinner. Well, if you're in a survival situation, your brain doesn't have that kind of time. So it wants to automate and make those decisions. How it does that more effectively is it flows the blood flow there. Well, when it does that, it takes it away from our prefrontal cortex, where we have all of our executive functioning skills, how we plan, how we organize, how we sequence things. And that's where we really our brain functions to solve problems when we're able to utilize that. But in order to do that, we have to be in a really good state of regulation, good state of homeostasis, right? Like our optimal state. Our optimal state as human beings is not stressed out at all. That's really only supposed to be a temporary state that we experience in the body because it's so damaging to be in a state of chronic stress because of being flooded with cortisol and stuff like that. Those hormones of stress cause inflammation, as you guys know, and then the inflammation leads to all different other kinds of physical ailments, which then compound, right? So I think that's where when we get into a state of burnout, it's like we've pushed our body to such an extreme that it our body is saying like, hey, wake up, listen to me. You're not listening. I'm going to hurt louder and stronger until you pay attention. If
Pain is a
that.
message.
Yeah, well,
Hmm.
and you can think about the way that the actual cortisol response manifests in a dysregulated fashion when we are burnt out, right? So if we're in
Yeah.
this heightened state because our job's stressful or we're making it stressful, which I think that
That we
sometimes
can.
it could be the latter more than the former, right? We build up all this stress and we've conditioned ourselves to think stress. I work well under stress, so we push and push and push. Then you add on someone who has a family or kids or just other
Mhm.
life responsibilities. And then we add in technology, which puts us in
Constant
this
input.
constant state of manufactured stress because then eyeballs stay attached a little bit longer. We know that social media in some capacity is manufacturing fear and anger and outrage to keep us connected. And we're
Yes.
also linked to this external brain, which is our iPhone, and that's constantly giving us hits.
Feedback.
Yes, well, and
Hmm.
it's usually hits of cortisol too, because we're expecting that there's something that we have to address on the other side. If we're living in that peak state of cortisol or we're constantly tapping into it, there's a dysregulation of sleep.
Mhm.
Then when there's a
Mhm.
dysregulation of sleep, we're not hitting REM, which means our brain's never healing, our body's never healing. And then that manifests into other chronic diseases over time. So if we aren't able to catch it and reverse it or build other ways of being
Mhm.
healthy, that's where it becomes chronic.
And what
Mhm.
and what would you say are the signs of burnout for somebody who's kind of telling themselves, "Oh, it must just be in my it's just me or I'm just tired or I can do this," whatever we tell ourselves to say, "I'm still functioning, I'm alive." What are the actual signs that this is very real and we need to address it?
I think when you hear people talking about having the dreads, where they're like, they get done with work on Friday and by Saturday morning, they're already dreading Monday and they're like counting it down. That's probably not a good sign, that you're in such a state of stress that your brain is now like not giving you any time to relax. If you end up going on vacation and say you take a weekend, you're like, I'm going to take a long weekend and I'm just going to relax and enjoy. And you get there and it takes your body until the day before you're supposed to leave to actually you feel that state of down regulation, you feel your body slow down and your brain slow down. It's like that woosah moment, when you're on vacation, you're like, yeah, this is great. I can do nothing, right? If your body can't get to that state, that's probably not a good sign. You know, I can tell the difference just in taking a vacation before I started the program and my last vacation
Mm.
that I went on. It was like immediate. As soon as I left, I was like, whoosh. But when I first started the program, I was on starting a 10-day trip, and it took me about halfway through to really start to like relax and get into my zone,
Those are some
so
If
those are
that's,
good
some things.
yeah, and if
Yeah.
that's where someone is at, what are some of the reasons so they can understand? I know we've talked about it a little bit, but what is the reason why it takes 10 days? Why does it take us that time to actually finally turn our brain and body off and down regulate?
Yeah, and maybe remove some of the judgment around that because I think people feel really, especially the women I talk to, feel really bad that they can't be present and they don't understand it.
Right. That is true. Right. We feel guilty. Like, why is my body doing this? Why is it so hard for me to be in the present moment, to relax, to when I'm with the people that I care about, actually be with the people I care about? And I think it has to do with all of those hormones. The hormones, because we're like you were talking about, Brian, we're constantly being fed a steady diet. It's a steady diet of
Mm,
stress. The hormones don't have an ability to process out of our system. We can't process them out fast enough, right? Because more are coming in. So um, I think that's part of the issue. The
mm,
other thing is we often don't give ourselves the skills, we don't engage in the skills and tools that will help purge the body of those things quicker, right? If we're feeling burnt out and we're tired, chances are we going to go on the walk? Are we going to do some physical activity? Maybe not. Maybe we're going to turn to food or maybe alcohol or something else that is in the moment may feel like a temporary anesthetic and
mhm,
may feel good in the moment, but actually is adding more of the stress hormones to the body.
Yeah.
mhm.
So it can take a while. And if you're still plugged in,
Mhm.
if you're still plugged in and you haven't
Yes.
unplugged,
Yes.
then you're still getting those constant
Mhm.
hits of cortisol
Yeah.
and it's the stress of what's
Mhm.
going on.
Yeah.
and you're not actually letting your body get into a relaxed state. And probably you're probably really tense. Your body is
Yeah.
probably holding on to everything.
Yeah.
And it will do that until it believes that it's in a safe place to let it go.
Yeah, it's like it to pull it back to your earlier metaphor. It's kind of like if you were in the waves getting crashed and crashed and crashed and crashed over again. You're like, man, I really got to get out of this water. But then you just stay there and let it keep hitting you.
And one of the things to kind of build off of that we do, you alluded to it, is the food and the alcohol is the equivalent of a temporary floaty, right?
Oh,
If you
yes.
But we're
think
still in
about,
the ocean.
we're
Yeah.
still in the water, but we feel some sense of instant relief. The
Hmm.
challenge is that
That's
oftentimes the
good.
food that we're turning to is not healthy for us and puts us in a state
Right.
where we have less energy because we're inflamed or we're putting on the pounds and it's just keeping us weighed down physically. And then alcohol is a toxin, right?
Right.
Alcohol, when we're toxifying our body, the great thing that alcohol does is it makes you hyper present. So it does shut off your brain's ability to be 10 miles away. It makes you here, but it
Mhm.
toxifies the body, and you wake up the next day and your body's in a worse place than when it was beforehand. So these temporary things that we do, there's no judgment to it. It's important to know though that those can exacerbate the problem. And I think that that's happening because we don't have a compelling vision of what it would look like on the other side of getting
Mm.
back out of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm curious, what are some routines or practices that we can put in place to get ourselves in a better place?
Gosh. One, I think we have to prioritize the time to take care of ourselves. That's number one. If I think that's the other thing about being in a state of burnout and that high state of stress. We're caught up in a belief system that we have to do all of these things to survive,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a negative cognitive pattern that is in there too. We have to disrupt that negative pattern, that negative belief system to say, no, actually, it's the opposite. Uh, there's a there's a type of therapy called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which talks about everything exists in opposite of one another. It's a dialectic. It is both and. Everything is a both and versus an either or black and white. And in DBT, we talk about we have to do an opposite action. We have to take the action that is opposite than the urge that our body is currently telling us to take, because that action is just an old habit pattern that has led us into the position that we're in now. So if we take an opposite action, right? So if my burnout is telling me, no, you need to get up early in the morning to get more work done. No, no, I don't need to get up early in the morning to get more work done. I probably need to sleep in and allow my body to get rest. Or maybe I need to slow down and do less work, right? So that would be one thing. Another thing would be making sure that we're treating ourselves like a house plant. We just like the general basics that you guys talk about, sunlight. Sunlight's so important in terms of mood regulation, hormones. It's essential for breaking down the certain amino acid that's responsible for making our feel good neurotransmitters, which help us not be depressed. So we need sunlight, we need water. Water, you guys talk about that all the time, how water is so important. We're 98% water. And if you think about that, everything is operating on a vibration and a frequency. And that includes us and every cell in our body. So, can I place myself in an area? Maybe it's in a hot tub. Maybe like it's doing something to get myself into that relaxed state? How can I help my
Mm.
body do what it's naturally designed to do? So something that's relaxing, getting that vibe in. Um, Eating enough, right? Am I eating nutrient dense foods versus, you know, chips, chocolate, pizza?
Yeah.
Um, those things, and the movement. Can I, there's something really, once if you've stopped prioritizing movement and you start moving again, you're like, oh yeah, this was really important. This
Yes.
was like just that little action can make such a big difference.
Mhm.
Um, but at the end of the day, if you're feeling burnt out, I think the key is you have to slow down and you have to completely redesign what you're doing because the way you've designed your life isn't functioning.
Woo. Good.
And that's hard to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what if you're hearing that and you're terrified?
Yeah. You're like, my whole life's gonna fall apart if I do that.
It it is frightening, right? That's what the burnout is trying to convince us of. That it's again just part of the negative program. We all have core beliefs that are operating on an unconscious or subconscious level, and it drives all of our behavior. If we can reprogram that, that can lead to such transformational shifts in our behavior. But that part is the hard work. So if somebody's feeling terrified, if I make this change, that means everything's going to fall and it's going to be terrible. It's probably a good idea to maybe seek out some support to help work on reprogramming and breaking down what are those underlying programs? What's the story that you're telling about yourself and what it means to be you in this context, right?
Yes.
If we can do that, then we can start to rebuild the framework of your belief system. And that is going to have a ripple effect on how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the people around you, and the actions that you take in the world.
Yes. I love this because I was gonna ask, what is the role of therapy in this? At what point should somebody seek out therapy? And is it something that is more of it almost comes across as if it's a last resort in that sentence I just shared, right? It's like
Oh,
how should people
yeah.
be maybe thinking about therapy's role in this? And then maybe we could talk different modalities, but I think you're starting to answer that question already, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I love that you're bringing that up. And I love that you're bringing up that oftentimes people arrive in therapy at that point. They're they're if you talk to any couples therapist, they
Yes.
will tell you
So true.
by the time the couple comes in for therapy, chances are that they're already at like the last stretch. They should have came in 2 years before, right? Therapy doesn't have to be a reactive
Mm,
process. Therapy can be a proactive tool. I'm a therapist in therapy. I've been in and out of therapy for a really long time. Um, it's helpful for a variety of reasons. One, we can't see through our own stuff. We can't be objective. It's very challenging to look at our experience and get out of our own way. But having somebody else to process with, to ask questions that might allow us to grab a different perspective. And that's where different modalities can be really powerful because depending upon the modality, it can help facilitate that person to have a different point of view or technique or intervention. Because once we have a different perspective or point of view, now we can start to say, like, oh, well, maybe that story is erroneous. Maybe it isn't factual. Well, let me look. Can I find any evidence to support the truth in the baloney that I've been telling myself, no, actually, this may be, more helpful. But it doesn't have to be a reactive process. It can be really proactive. And I actually think it's better if it's proactive because then you can start to build your own tool set, right? To help you better challenge things as they come up. Because we all are going to experience limiting beliefs. I'm sure you all have experienced limiting beliefs too.
Yes.
And you work through them to continue to push forward and show up in the way that you both do in the world. Um, and same with me. I have a ton of limiting beliefs. They're always chattering back there. I have one that I call the boss. The boss is always talking. The boss is oh, they are a taskmaster.
Mm,
And when the boss is talking, I have to be really cognizant of that voice, that inner voice, because chances are it's coming from a place of I'm not doing enough,
mm-hmm.
right? That I'm
Mm-hmm.
having to work really, really hard. And I have that overachiever kind of personality where I'm going to try and do all the things and really excel. But that is not healthy for me because it leads to doing too much,
Yeah.
taking
Mm-hmm.
on too much and burning out. So
Yes.
working with a therapist can help you figure out what your internal voices are and how when they show up what to do.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that one thing I would highlight there too, because someone might hear that and they think, well, I don't want to go from achieving to not achieving. I still want my boss, right? So
Yeah,
when the boss shows up for you, there's, I'm going to assume, and you can correct me, there's times where you're like, very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
right.
I'm really glad I listened to the boss. But the key is knowing when maybe the boss is asking you to work 16 hours on a Friday and you're saying, well, if I keep doing this, chances are I'm not going to show up next Friday, boss. So it's being able to
Right.
listen to when that driver, that thing that makes you successful is necessary and helpful.
Hmm.
And I want to tie this in too, and you could give me more feedback. But if you have the results that you want and you have the life that you want, well, then great. Then the boss has served you, right? You know, if everything is
Hmm.
hunky dory, then we don't have a problem.
Right.
It's when you're recognizing that there's friction or there's something that's not
Mm,
going the right way. And that's where you want to be proactive to get external feedback.
right.
I think that some of the fear from ambitious people is, and it might be, oh, there's all swaths of people because there's the people who don't want to face their fears because that would mean something about them. And there's so much pain around that. So everyone has their own
Mhm.
little examples. But in this example, it's like, I don't want to talk about that because I don't want to conflict with my goals.
Sure.
I don't want to become soft or apathetic. And so I'm not going to even talk about it. I'm just going to keep pushing because I want to be successful. So
Yeah.
it sounds like the boss is serving us, so it's okay to still have
Hmm.
the boss. We don't have to shut them down. We don't have to fire them, but we might need to have another voice. We might need to be able to learn when to tune in and when to tune out. Is that for the skeptic who hears this and is like, I don't want to even go there? Is that
That's
a helpful?
perfect.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to describe it. I think too, it's important to know that every part, every voice that we have that might be that inner narrator, um, they have a function, and the function has been a protective one, typically, right? They're there to protect us in some capacity. So achieving is protecting us because that's important. It's important for us to be a contributor. It's important for us to be successful or to excel in school academically, for example. So, thanking that part, thank you so much for how much you've protected me and how well you've served me.
Mm,
You've done such a phenomenal job. I appreciate you so much. And I'm doing so well right now. I can take a break. I can take a break. I appreciate you. I'm just going to have you kind of take a break, move over here for a little while. and I'll let you know when I need you. They can
Mm-hmm.
always come back out,
Yeah.
but it's just having that recognition, because if we never turn it off, and I'm sure you've met those folks too. I have in my practice over the years, the folks that are incredibly successful, super driven, and yet they're miserable in their lives because that voice never quiets, it never dims, and they don't have any inner peace. They don't have the meaningful relationships they want with their loved ones because they can't be present, or they're going on vacation and their partner's still really angry with them because they spent 8 hours of the vacation day while they and their kid are out on the beach. They're in the hotel room working on the computer because the boss didn't shut off. And so it's recognizing, like, yes, it's a both and. This is helping us, but it can also be harming us. And we want to find the inner balance there, right? We want to, what's that happy medium between the two, so that we can recognize, like, okay, I actually need you to help me now. I need you to push me a little bit harder. Oh, I need you to back off. Um,
Yeah.
does that
Yeah.
Yeah.
make sense?
I wanted to ask this question while we're talking about therapists and therapy and finding our way through it, because this is a really helpful dialogue for someone who might be on the other side. How would you suggest someone hire their therapist? Because
Oh gosh, that's a good
and
question.
I'll share a very small tangent, because one time when I first started going to therapy years ago, I hired my first therapist and I was getting ready to run my first ultra marathon. And the advice that he was giving me about some of the challenges that I was experiencing felt entirely antithetical to maybe what I was actually experiencing. And like the way I was pushing and the goals that I had and kind of the psychology that I knew I needed to have in order to achieve the goal. It was almost like he was diminishing it. Luckily, I was able to have the self-awareness to say this doesn't feel right. This doesn't
Mhm.
this I'm not getting anything from this, and I don't feel like this is what I'm looking to gain from this relationship, and I found someone else. I think that people have those experiences and then it turns them off and they think, well, therapy's not for me. So if someone's hearing this and maybe they're becoming more open, how might you suggest them finding the right therapist for them, or that, I want to say, hiring process for the help that they might need?
Yeah, you bring up such a wonderful point, Brian. And, no matter what modality a therapist practices, the most important aspect of whether or not change is going to happen for the client is really determined about the quality of the relationship between the therapist and the client. So you were I'm glad that you had that level of awareness, go like, this is not the right fit for me. I have to find somebody else. Goodness of fit is really an important factor. And I would say, interviewing people, reaching out, asking, would you give me 10-15 minutes of your time so I can ask you a few questions? Most therapists will do that. Some won't, some will not. They'll say, hey, I have some videos. You can watch my videos, see what I have to say, see if it resonates for you, see if you feel like it would be a good match. But you have to do your research and take the initiative in the same way that you would if you were diagnosed with, say, a life-threatening illness. You would be seeking out probably multiple doctors to see which doctor is going to be the best fit to take care of this particular ailment that I have. Which one do I feel most comfortable with?
Mm.
Which one do I feel like I could actually take off any kind of protective measure, mask that I might have up to protect myself, and actually allow the truth to come out? Because to tell the truth about where our pain is, what's going on, the beliefs that we hold about ourselves is extremely vulnerable and difficult. And we want to be able to do that with somebody that we feel that we can trust. Because if we don't, what's the point? If I can't trust the person, I can't be honest about it if I'm afraid they're going to judge me or they're going to lead me in the wrong direction.
Totally.
It's not worth it.
Amen.
Hmm. Yeah. And this is I'm glad that we went there because it's so true. Once, if somebody starts to feel like it's a one and done, then it's going to be really hard to grow, right? A lot of what we're talking about today requires reflection, right? Even
Mm,
one thing I wrote down from a few moments ago was I think one of the biggest problems with actually finding your way out of burnout is that you're so morphed with that boss voice that
yeah.
it's not separate from you.
Mhm.
It just never even occurs that perhaps the way I've been operating is actually an option versus the
Mhm.
only way, right? And I think that as you're saying this, it's like I almost think it'd be best to from here go into story because for somebody who's just never even thought, oh, maybe there is a different way, right?
Mhm.
I'd be curious to hear from you, from your personal experience, how, and maybe it was before you actually started working with us, but how did you recognize that this wasn't sustainable? Like, where were you at before you started working with us? Like, kind of illuminate as much as you're comfortable sharing, like where you were, what was going on for you, and then we'll kind of walk our way out of that.
Yeah, I feel like I was kind of coming out of a series of just really difficult years where it kind of started in 2018, 2019. My mom got sick and she lived about 2 hours from me and maybe two plus, depending upon traffic. And she had cancer, and my sister and I were taking care of her. My sister lived there, and so she really took the burden of being with her as much as possible so she could stay at home. At first we were doing treatment, and then it didn't work, so went into hospice care. But I was commuting back and forth up there and back there as often as I could, at least every week. Sometimes I would stay for a whole week, sometimes not. And then after that, after she passed and kind of moved in, it went right into COVID and the world shut down. And it was just like I really felt like a steamroller. Like every time I lifted my head up, like, okay, like I can get back to my like normal routine. I can get back to taking care of myself. I can get back to what I was doing. Something else happened, right? I started to get back to the gym regularly. COVID came, the world shut down, the gym shut down. I got COVID. Um,
Yeah.
and and then it was like, okay, starting to kind of bounce back. And then we had a massive hurricane here where I live. It was a
Yeah.
category 5 hurricane that hit the beach. And it really devastated my husband's boat charter business at the time. It's never rebounded. And so that was really difficult. We were very fortunate in that we didn't have any water flooding, but it was like a finger width away of water coming into our
Wow.
house.
Wow.
Um, that was very traumatic because the emergency area that they set up was at a college walking distance from my house. So there was like military grade helicopters coming and going because they were distributing emergency equipment. And it was just a very
Intense.
intense period. We had clients in the practice that lost their homes, like completely lost their homes, devastation, total like nothing, everything gone. Homes, cars. One of the therapists in the practice also lost their home, their car. They had just what they had left to evacuate with. So it was a very high stress, legitimately high stress
Yeah.
time. And I think I had gotten into that state and was like, I just have to push through. I just have to push through over this hump. And I had to move my office. And so it was like the hurricane. A couple months later, I had to move my office, moved into a bigger office, which was good, but also challenging. And I thought, okay, once I'm there and it's set up, I can breathe. But that really didn't happen for all of 2023. And at the beginning, I went on vacation at the end of 2023 and I realized like what I was talking about. I had such a hard time relaxing, even though I was in like one of the most beautiful places. There was nothing for me to do but just lay on the beach. There was no reason but I couldn't feel relaxed. My body wasn't doing it. And I was like, I have to make some changes. I have to do something different. And when I got back in January, I was trying on my own. And by the time I had found you, I don't even know how I found you. Maybe it was a Facebook ad. I don't know. But by the time
Probably.
I found you, I was like, I need to do something that I've never done before, and I need something that's going to bring a more holistic approach to meet me where I'm at in my like therapeutic brain. Because most of the programs that I did try, because I did try to do some other things during those high stress times, they were so intense. It was like more cortisol. It was so intense and it was very all or nothing kind of energy.
Mm.
And I just was like feeling like collapse underneath it. Like, what is wrong with me that I can't be successful here? It must be me because I see all these other people, the comparison, see all these other people and their pictures, and, I lost this and I did that. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't figure out how to eat 100 grams of protein. I don't know how to do it. Can you help me, please? I don't know how to do that. Um,
Yeah.
so it was like, it just was a buildup. I feel like I talk too much.
No, it's
You're such
beautiful.
a great storyteller. I was right there with you, picturing it all. Yeah.
What do you, so if that's all the things that you went through,
Yeah.
which is understandable that the boss was running the show and you were stressed and all those things are built
Mhm.
up, which I
Yeah.
imagine a lot of people can hear themselves in that story somewhere.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
decide to do something different, and what has changed? What has changed in that time? So you decided, all right, I'm going to do something different.
Yeah.
What
Oh,
were the baby steps and what is the outcome? What has changed after the baby steps? Where are you today?
Mhm.
yeah. I think the baby steps were, and I'm still on baby steps, I feel like, but the baby steps were just recognizing, oh my gosh, I was not drinking enough water during the day because this is the truth, y'all. If I drank water, that means I would have to stop what I was doing to go use the restroom.
Mhm.
That's how crazy that voice was. That is not a healthy voice.
Mhm.
Um, so simple things like really thinking about it, intentionally thinking about it, evaluating, checking in, making sure I'm drinking enough water, making sure I am feeling myself, figuring out what to keep in the house if I can't do meal prep to make sure that I have consistent, stable things to eat throughout the week, moving again at all, whatever that may be. I'm standing at my standing desk at the office and I have one of the walking treadmills down here. So using that, getting back in the gym, doing stuff at home, even the workouts at home, just that has been great. I just been adding things in slowly as we've moved through the months. But also, I think what's been really helpful for me is the fact that you all bring in very intentional opportunities for reflection in how you structure your program, and you provide concrete, scientifically backed approaches to changing your regulation state, right? When you guys are talking about state change, it's really about our regulation. How's our nervous system regulating? Are we upregulated, lots of energy? Are we down regulated? Are we feeling like low vibe and just don't have energy to do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
all of those things, and thinking about, okay, I know a lot of what you guys talk about,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't putting it into action in my own life. And so now I'm being very strategic about that. I'm using a physical planner for the first time that I have in years. It took me a long time to stop using the physical planner and become like a digital person and having a digital calendar. But what happened when I did that, there was a loss of different things. So now I have my planner, I'm using it every day. I'm checking in with myself. What worked yesterday? What do I need to do differently today? Tracking what I'm doing so that I'm rewarding myself when I'm taking the healthy actions that I'm trying to cultivate in my life. Um,
Good.
yeah.
This is good. So I'm going to pause because I'm going to do a follow-up to come back to the story, but to pull this into a timeline that people can find themselves in, because this is so good. If you're approaching burnout or you're there, there's a lot of beautiful advice that you've given so far from the therapist perspective. And now that we're pulling it into story, it starts with recognizing that this is not
Mhm.
okay. Like
Yeah.
this is not healthy. This is not good.
It's
And
not sustainable.
it's not sustainable. And even just that recognition is truly the first move. Because until
Mhm.
then, we're just running on old programming and we're
Right.
hoping something changes, but we didn't actually recognize that the approach we're taking is not working, right?
Right.
So that's first. And then you actually said something interesting that I think is opposing to how people would guess you went about getting healthy, which was you actually added slowly first, as opposed to maybe what some people would advise, maybe fitness or therapists or whomever, they might say, hey, slow down. It's like the recognizing was the slowing. So you actually were able to start adding little baby steps to your rituals or routines rather than being like, hey, stop working. Like just stop working so hard because that would be too
Mhm.
far of a leap. So you
Oh, yeah.
slowly added. And as you slowly started to add and add and add, and just focus on being intentional, which was maybe like step three was, okay, I need to be intentional. I need to actually put some attention on this, be focused on my health. Then you started being much more, we'll say, you said strategic, so I'll roll with that, but strategic with tracking and measuring. You got back into
Mhm.
that analytical place. But
Yeah.
again, that was like step four. It wasn't like, hey, let's be perfect. Let's jump in. Let's like go full force. Or the opposite, which is stop everything altogether so you can be healthy. It's like you
Mhm.
just defined what balance and steadiness and easing in actually looks like.
Thank you for that reflection, Lindsay. I appreciate it.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. You're welcome. Is that fairly accurate? Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. And I think there was some moments last year where I was really struggling with, am I doing it good enough? But what helps me is every time I come to the calls, you all are talking about, let's focus on what you are doing, not what you're not doing. And that just refocuses my brain on the goal. the end goal versus the problem. Because if I'm stuck on the problem, then I'm in the problem and I'm not going anywhere. If I can focus on what's the action that's getting my goal, that helps me to get there that much faster. And with the strategy, I think too, I've been pulling back more from work, right? Instead
Mm.
of doing more at work, I'm actually doing a lot less at work than I was before.
That's amazing. That's a good thing, right?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Yes, it's a great thing. It's a great thing. I'm doing less. My assistant's doing more. We're growing. Good things are happening. But I'm not
Mm.
on that constant content, like having to be doing something, having to be performing in some way. No, like I have a lot more reflective time, planning time, preparatory time, which is great.
Yeah, and
That's
you're also
great.
giving your assistant more work, which I imagine makes them happy
Yeah.
and fulfills a need for them. Like in a positive way, right? It's a team, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're close to time, but I wanted to tie this down with just one question for you. So, if those are the things that you've done, how would you describe where you're at right now? So, you're delegating more, you're focused on the most important things to move the business forward and move your life forward. What other beautiful changes have you accomplished, achieved, or where are you right now? So maybe someone can see the light at the end of the
Yeah.
rainbow.
How do you
Mm.
feel instead?
I just
What?
tied two things. I said light at the end of the rainbow, light at the end of the
I didn't
tunnel,
even notice
pot
that.
of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Oh,
Just
yeah, pot of gold. Well, I think like what Lindsay was saying, for me, it's really about feeling and energy. And I feel a lot better. Physically, I feel a lot better. Emotionally, I feel a lot better. My nervous system feels a lot better. I don't feel like I am in that chronic squeeze. Like, I know
Mm.
adrenal fatigue isn't actually a real thing, but there is a felt sense of that inner pressure when you can sense all of those hormones in your body and it feels painful. Like at any moment you're about to cry. And I would have that a lot. I don't have that anymore.
beautiful.
So those are really positive mechanisms of change. I feel better in my body. I feel stronger in my body. Um, I I feel like I'm more flexible because of a lot of yoga and stuff that I've been doing since I started. So that mobility feels a lot better. And I've actually been engaging more socially too, which feels a lot better, which on our first call, I was going on a solo vacation because I just needed to be away from people. I still had people time, but I needed some like just me
Distance.
time to do that down regulatory process of like I just can't have other people's energy. I need to do that so I could get here, which is now I can be with other people and it's not draining from me because I have more to give. Where before I felt like, I don't have enough to give myself. I'm not doing a good job giving to others.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful place to
Yes,
be.
that's a great tie down because I think that eliminates a lot of the fear around if I slow down, if I take care of myself, like it's gonna retract. And it's like, no, your business is gonna grow. It will
Hmm.
actually be sustainable growth. You will actually have greater or deeper or wider spread connection that feels real
Hmm.
and not exhausting. So much more of life comes when you are
Hmm.
taken care of. So that's a beautiful example. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for supporting me. I'm so grateful that I found you.
Likewise, very grateful to be a part of your journey and story. Tying it down, Reina, just two questions. One is what needs to happen in order for you to conquer your day?
Yes.
What
What have
what
we
like what are some
determined?
of the habits, rituals, routines, or things that you do that make it a great
Your
day?
non-negotiables.
Oh, um, one, I think it is starting the day with my planner.
Mm.
Like I've been really incorporating starting and ending the day with my planner so that one, I can add things that I need to get done the next day. Otherwise, they'll evaporate and then I'll start to get stressed and get back in that because I'm not getting all things done. So just having that helps me stay accountable to myself. One, I think movement, just adding in movement as much as possible. Some days I get I'm so busy I can't, but I have been working to push through that by using my treadmill in the office or making myself go out on a walk in the office park. So integrating the movement and really doing a better job at meal preparation. I've always been a meal prepper. That's just part of my routine based on my job because most of my life I've worked evenings and don't get home until really late. So I need to have stuff prepped. I don't have time to cook dinner when I get home. But I've been much more intentional about making sure there's enough for the entire week and packaging things out successfully.
Very
Love that.
good.
Ask for one habit, the boss shows up and gives me three. I love it. No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good. You're good.
And what is one book that has changed your life more than any other?
Hmm. Gosh, that's a hard question because there's so many amazing books out there.
Mhm.
But um, I want to say The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, which is amazing. And I think the best concept from that book is really recognizing that we are not this body. We are observing the experience that the body is having with us, but we're not the body, right? So if we can observe the thought that we're thinking, then are we thinking the thought or are we observing the thought that's happening?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yes, that's one of my
That's a great
favorites.
insight.
It takes a bit to process, but it's such a powerful book when you can wrap your head around it. Mhm.
Yeah.
No pun
No pun
intended, but
intended.
yes.
Reina, where can people connect with you? Where can they discover more about your work and where might they be able to discover more about your services and too?
Sure. So two websites. One is my practice website. It's called floridaarttherapyservices.com. I know it's really long, but there you'll find all about myself, but all the other therapists that work in my practice and what they do, who they serve. And we offer some continuing education for other mental health professionals too. And then the other would be my consulting business, which is creativeclinicianscorner.com. And there you can find all of the episodes of the Creative Psychotherapist podcast, where I talk with other therapists and we talk all about all kinds of things related to therapy and entrepreneurship and creativity and things like that.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
We'll make sure those are in the show notes. So
Thank
thank
you.
you all. And Reina, thank you so much for this beautiful gift. It's been a blessing and an
Yes.
honor to have you here. I think that we've all gained something. It's a real
Mhm.
pleasure. We're so grateful for you. And
Yes.
for those of you who are listening in, we hope that there's a nugget of wisdom here as well. So if you're on YouTube, let us know in the comment section what you gained from this, what your insights were. If you're on Apple, feel free to leave us a review and let us know where this really resonated with you, what you gained. And more than anything, take this wisdom and go out and conquer your day.
Cheers.
Thank you guys.